Good morning, everyone. I'm hoping everyone can see and hear us. I want to welcome you to this 30th World Press Freedom Day, which also happens to fall on the 75th anniversary of the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights. This webinar is being hosted by the World Broadcasting Unions with support from the European Broadcasting Union and the United Nations. Freedom of expression is a fundamental driver of all human rights. And over this next hour, we want to focus our attention and yours on the particular power and impact of investigative journalism around the world. My name is Diana Swain. I've been a journalist in Canada for over 35 years, much of that spent in investigative journalism. Presently, I'm the managing editor of investigative journalism for the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, which is Canada's public broadcaster. I'm joining you this morning from Toronto, but our conversation spans far beyond North America. We have contributors today from all around the globe. We have 4 speakers in particular who will talk with us about the ways in which investigative journalism is evolving where they are, but also the challenges that they are facing, as so many of us are. We're going to discuss what's needed to do our work, the risks we are facing in doing it, physical and beyond, and how examples of media organizations working together can aid in both amplifying the work and drowning out the voices that seek to silence journalism and the fight for accountability. So a couple of quick housekeeping notes before we get going here. I'll quickly let you know who is joining us on our panel today, so you know who's with us. You'll see their names underneath them as well. I will circle back to each of them then with 3 or 4 minutes for them to give some opening remarks that might also prompt some questions from you. And if you have some questions, we invite you to put them in the Q&A panel, and I'll be trying to keep an eye on that as we go along. Our intention here is to have this webinar for about an hour. It's 9 a.m. Eastern time right now. I know it's evening in some places where you're joining us. And we will go for an hour, give or take. If the conversation is rolling, we can blow by the top of the clock, about 10 minutes or so. So very briefly, I will come back to introduce each person, but ask them to just nod or raise their hand as I introduce them very quickly now. From the United Nations, we're joined this morning by Nanette Braun. We are also joined from the European Broadcasting Union and project manager of the European Investigative Project and Network, Belen Lopez Garrido. Hello. Giselle Nemi Nga is the chief editor of the African Union of Broadcasting. She's joining us this morning as well. And finally, we're joined by Larbi Magari, who will be giving us a view of journalism from the Arab world. Thanks, Larbi. So we'll go back to the beginning here, and I'm going to introduce our first speaker. As mentioned, Nanette Braun is the Deputy Director for the Campaigns and Country Operations Division of the Department of Global Communications of the UN. She joined the UN in 1995 as Deputy Director of Campaigns and Country Operations Division in the UN Department for Global Comms. She oversees campaigns to increase global visibility and engage audiences in the UN's global priorities. Before that, Nanette headed the communications and public advocacy team at UN Women, the women rights arm of the UN. A journalist by training, she's worked for print media and broadcasters in her native Germany and abroad. Nanette, could you start us off by contextualizing our discussion in terms of the connection between the right to report and human rights in general?
Yeah, thank you so much, Diane, and good morning and good afternoon, everybody who's joining, and to start with, happy International World Press Freedom Day. And you mentioned that this is the 30th anniversary of World Press Freedom Day, and at the same time, we are also this year looking at the 75th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And I think it is important to note that freedom of expression, and by extension press freedom, is a human right in and by itself. Article 19 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights stipulates the freedom of opinion and the freedom of expression, and says that everybody has the right to seek, revise, and impart information and ideas through any media and regardless of frontiers. And I think this is very important to keep in mind as we are looking at press freedom around the world today. And it is important to note that press freedom is a human right in and by itself, but it is also fundamental for all other rights. The Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, has called it the lifeblood for human rights. And we need investigative journalism to uncover injustices, to investigate rights violations, and in short, to speak truth to power and hold to account. But what we see, of course, today is that this precious good, precious public good, is under ever more pressure. 85% of the world's population have experienced a decline in press freedom in their countries in the past 5 years. And what we've also seen is 67 journalists were killed last year. And that is up 50% from just the year before. So this is really a dramatic situation. And I think when we are looking at press freedom and what has happened, it makes sense to look at the media landscape that media are operating in at the moment, the information landscape. And what we see when we look what we have now in terms of an media environment and information environment compared to 30 years ago is that really the seismic shift that we saw with the rise of digital platforms. I mean, it's worthwhile to remember that 30 years ago, when the first World Press Freedom Day was commemorated, the internet basically was just beginning. I mean, it was not that everybody had access to the internet 30 years ago. It just started. And then 20 years ago, we saw the launch of the establishment of Facebook, and then all the other social media platforms that now have so much influence in our daily lives and globally. And while we have seen a lot of benefits also with the rise of digital platforms and this digital information ecosystem, there are also obviously major concerns. And one is that we've seen a shift from balanced, nuanced news reporting, according to journalistic standards, to often really unfiltered opinion and sometimes raw anger. And that not only on social media, but we've also seen the rise of opinion media, for instance, globally. And that has, of course, been exploited by a range of actors, prominently including politicians, but also others. And it has caused deep rifts across societies globally that we are seeing now. And if you want the extreme expression of this, the new focus on opinion, on emotion, on often anger, is the really widespread rise of mis and disinformation and hate speech that we see nowadays in the digital environment. It's become toxic. And while, of course, mis and disinformation is not new, what we see in this new environment, that its spread is basically baked into the business model as algorithms push content that generate outrage and generate strong emotions. And we now also see, and this is maybe the new frontier, AI that is coming into the mix, and we've seen lots of news reporting about deep fakes and more. And I think this is something that will keep us occupied for years to come as we try to navigate how to deal with these new tools as well. And coming back to the impact for news media, and we are talking about investigative journalism here, is we see on one hand a declining public trust in media. Media are no longer regarded as the authoritative voices based on factual information that is due to the divisiveness that we are seeing. And some actually speak of a post-factual society that we are basically in at the moment. And that, of course, is a big problem for news media, the decline in public trust. We have also seen, on the other hand, the legal crackdown in many countries disguised as addressing hate speech and used as an excuse to curb freedom of expression. I think the latest figures that I've seen is that in 44 countries in recent years, we've seen new laws and regulations that are basically curbing freedom of expression. And of course, we know that revenue went down dramatically. The audiences are on social media, the audiences are on digital platform. And that means, for news media, that advertisers have moved to social media with the result that ad revenue has dropped about 50% in the past decade. And if you take the economic impact of COVID on top of that, then you see that an organization like our sister UN organization, UNESCO, really speaks of extinction level events as far as news media are concerned. And all of that, of course, shows us that we need journalism and we need investigative journalism. And I know our panel is titled the Investigative Journalism and the Right to Report. And I think this is very important to remember, of course, as we are looking also into the broader context of human rights. But I think what this also tells us when we look at the current landscape is that there is the urgent need for investigative journalism. And I think that's what we want to discuss here. And I look forward, of course, to hearing from my co-panelists.
Nanette, thank you very much. And we'll come back to you a little bit later in this conversation. I want to move now to Belén López Garrido. She's a graduate of the Columbia School of Journalism in the United States. She started her career as a reporter and later U.S. correspondent for various Spanish television and radio stations. She joined the Eurovision New York Bureau in 2005 as a news producer. And then in 2009, she moved to Geneva, where she worked as a news editor for the Eurovision News Exchange for about a decade. She now manages editorial operations for the News Strategy and Innovation Department of the EBU. She's also the project manager of the EIPN. It's a network of reporters and editors from EBU members who are specialized in investigative journalism. Belén, thank you for joining us, and we'd like to hear your opening remarks.
Thank you, Diana, and hello, everyone. It is really a pleasure to be here today. I think, as it has been pointed out before, we all agree that freedom of expression, press freedom, and the right to report are intrinsically linked, and they have a direct effect on the health of societies and the informed choices that their populations can make when they exercise their rights as citizens. I wanted today specifically to remember, we heard some sobering figures already from Nanette, but I wanted to remind everyone that there are currently more than 560 journalists imprisoned around the world, according to Reporters Without Borders. And I know that on a day like today, we're all thinking of them and people like the Wall Street Journal reporter, Evan Gershkovich, who has now spent a month in prison in Russia for simply attempting to exercise his right to report. So these are scary times, but I think we as journalists, we need to press on and we need to get creative and we need to come together at times, bypassing competition and individual circumstances to serve this higher purpose, if you will, of getting the important stories out there. So I think what I wanted to highlight today is that, at least in our experience and what I can talk about, is that when we face a country, for example, like Russia, where the human rights situation in general is pretty dire, and the freedom of expression and press freedom situation in particular is terrible, there are sometimes, if not always, ways to go around it. And I wanted to show you how we did it with a very practical example from the reporting side, because this is precisely what we did here at the EBU Investigative Network. I'm going now, hopefully, to show you my presentation, which you can see. And if you can signal to me that you are seeing it, that would be great. Thank you. So we did a story on the missing children of Ukraine. This was a months-long investigation on the forcible transfer of children from the occupied territories of Ukraine into Russia for placement into foster or adoptive families, and the structure that was behind it, and how this was continuing to be an issue, and an issue that had the support and encouragement of the Kremlin at the highest levels, with Putin and Maria Lvova-Belova as the main people behind it. We did know, and it had been reported before, that children were being taken out of East Ukraine into Russia under the justification of humanitarian evacuations. And we knew, because Russia never hid it, that these kids were ending up in Russian families. Now, there was one version of this story, and it is the version that Russia was giving to the public, and this is how they portray it.
Мы едем к приемным родителям, потому что мы там с сестрами будем всегда вместе, а в интернатах мы с ними порознь.
Я переживаю вместе с ними, честно, вот прям конская
Now, what we did was we looked at this video and many others that were out there. And we put together a team of reporters from different news organizations. We pooled our resources, we shared intelligence and reporting, and together we amplified, as you were saying before, Diana, the result of our investigation throughout the membership. Now, for those who don't know, as the European Broadcasting Union is the world's biggest alliance of public service media, we represent more than 100 members in Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East, and we have partners in other areas. So in our news department, we have a small group of investigative journalists who are part of this EBU, Investigative Journalism Network, and together we work on sharing intelligence, content, and investigations. Now, we know now that the reality was very different from this picture of rescue operations that the Russian authorities were painting. And about a month after we published this story, where we wanted to emphasize the systematization of these transfers, the International Criminal Court issued arrest warrants for Putin and Maria Lvova-Belova, the two people that we identified as the main characters behind the operation. So I think my message today is that there is a strength in the numbers. And what we have found is that while there is no blanket solution to counteract the restrictions and the repression on journalists that countries like Russia or many others are imposing, because this happens in every single continent, it is very difficult for governments or other agents to ignore the global audience that news organizations can bring when they are combined. So in this sense, what I think was our main tool as well, and the main evidence, was the huge propaganda effort done by the Russian authorities to sell these transfers of children. We looked at dozens of videos like the one I showed before, and we really used their massive misinformation effort to extract what was factual about it. The number of children, the locations they were coming from or arriving into, the images of them receiving Russian passports. And with all of this, we built the case to show how this could amount to a war crime or even a crime against humanity, which is what the legal experts we consulted told us. We combined these with reporting on the ground, other open source information that our investigators were able to obtain from Russian official channels, and the personal stories of families and children who ended up in Russia after being separated. As I mentioned, we published in mid-February, just before the anniversary of the war, and about 1 month later, we got the ICC issued those arrest warrants. And now I'm never going to claim that those warrants were a result of this investigation. But what I do know is that the fact that news organizations around the world, EBU members, but also many others out there who had done some very solid reporting on the issue, brought forward many particular cases that are now evidence in the prosecution. The propaganda videos we examined are also being used by the ICC legal teams. So to me, I think the lesson learned and the message I would like to convey today from our very small experience is that, yes, it is getting increasingly difficult for investigative journalists to dig out the truth when it comes to countries like Russia, who have all but cut off access to that right to report, which is the basis of our job. But there are new opportunities out there when it comes to things like open source intelligence, collaboration, and the global sphere of information. And I think it is our duty as well to seize those opportunities and find new avenues to get our stories out there. Thank you.
Ellen, thank you very much. And I know we'll want to come back to you on the use of social media, which is now under fire in so many ways, but that you were actually able to use to leverage to get some of that information. So I want to come back to that point. I want to move now to Giselle Nemianga. She is the chief editor of the African Union of Broadcasting. She was appointed deputy director and editor-in-chief of the African Broadcasting Union Content Center in Algiers in August of 2022. That's where she joins us today. And she has noted that her signal is going in and out. So if the camera goes off, not to fear, she's still able to hear us and we can hear her. Prior to her appointment, she was the head of the regional station, CRTV Center in Cameroon. And Giselle, I wonder if you could talk about the emergence of human rights in some African nations. What has that meant for the practice of journalism and investigative journalism in particular, as we note those days together today?
Thank you for everyone. And thank you for giving me the floor to talk about the investigative journalism in Africa and its impact on the human rights. Before beginning my speech, I just want you to know that in Africa, to practice investigative journalism is very dangerous. In 2022, for example, we lost 55 journalists and 4 collaborators of media who was trying to practice journalism, investigative journalism. Recently in Cameroon, I think you understood about the situation of Martinez Ogo issues. It is the name of the director of Amplitude FM, a local radio in Yaoundé, the capital of Cameroon, who died after 3 days. He was kidnapped by, we don't know. In the general opinion, people think that he was killed by some high personality whom he was accusing embezzling public funds. And you know that according to UNESCO, the rates of the journalism killed on duty has increased by 50%. In Africa, the situation is worse because of many reasons. Firstly, we can talk about inadequate protection means. Journalists in Africa is not protected by the public, by the government. We have again in Africa more journalists who have difficult to access to information. We have again things like unfavorable economic situation and the connection of journalists with high personalities, which is not good for the practice of the journalism in Africa. I am here in African Union of Broadcasting since 7 months, and here in the AUB, we try to help broadcasters which are our members to improve their manner to practice journalism, investigative journalism, and we try to train their collaborators. We organize many trainings with journalists to help them to practice their work. We have again. We try to give them information about our platform. In our platform, they can have many information in situation in Africa, in situation in the world, to help them to access to information. During our webinar, we try to show you that it's not easy. It's not easy to be a journalist in Africa. Not easy because of all of this reason that I give you. Because of many barriers that I give you during my first speech. I ask your pardon because my first language is not English, but I will try to tell you something about the situation of investigative journalism in Africa.
Giselle, thank you very much. And I think we're happy to hear from people from various backgrounds and languages, and appreciate you taking the time to talk to us in English. We now wanted to move the conversation to Larbi Magari for a view of journalism right now in the Arab world. Larbi is a news coordinator at the Arab States Broadcasting Union in Algiers. He spent 15 years working in print media before moving to broadcasting at the Algerian television station EPTV. He was there for 14 years as a news coordinator and then as deputy director of exterior affairs. He was in charge of the Mediterranean Regional News Exchange, which is part of the EBU. Larbi, thank you for joining us. I hope you can hear us well, and we're anxious to hear what you have to say to kick things off.
Thank you very much for this invitation. I'm happy to be with you talking about the experience of freedom of the press and investigative journalism. I wanted to say that it's not only in the Arab world, it's all over the world. Freedom of the press and investigative journalism goes hand in hand. And in the Arab world, the freedom of press and the investigative journalism is not from the Arab Spring. We have in the Arab world, it is a long history of investigative journalism from the 50s, from the 60s. We have a big name called Hassanin Heikel, who was in the 50s an investigative journalist. And he was training people, Egyptian people and Arab journalists for this kind of journalism. I want to. I know that I don't have too long time to explain everything, but I want just to focus on the current situation in the Arab world about investigative journalism is a lot better than 2 decades ago, but it's not, of course, it's not perfect. There is many challenges facing investigative journalists across the Arab world. At the ASBU, for who are not familiar with ASBU, it's the Arab State Broadcasting Unions. We represent 22 Arab countries, Arab government-owned organizations, broadcasters. We are trying in ASBU to develop this kind of investigative journalism between our members. We are at the beginning, at our first steps. But if you ask me what the challenges that investigative journalists in the Arab world are facing, I would start by self-censorship. It is a psychological aspect. In the Arab world, the freedom of press is not that mature. It's in its first steps. So we have this old generation of journalists who have the right to say a lot of things, but they self-censorship. They are living in self-censorship. This is to compare with the new generation, with our more, they feel more freedom in covering events, including investigative journalism. The other challenge in the Arab world is the access to the information. It's not only the authorities, it's also about social institutions. There is a kind of no culture of passing on information. There is no, also there is no laws and rules like in the West. I'm talking about this pact of the right to get the information. It is not guaranteed in the Arab world. I mean, there is no such culture in passing on or asking for information, even if it is happening a lot of development and improvement in this way. Also, there is social and cultural pressures in the Arab societies. There is some barriers to engage in some kind of investigative journalism. Let's say, for example, topics of sex abuse, for example, topic of drugs, topic of women-related problems. There is this social and cultural pressures in the world. Of course, journalists are part of the society and they feel this pressure. Also, I've noticed during my career the lack education. I mean, the universities and educational institutions are not delivering proper education and training in terms of investigative journalism. This affects a lot the performance of this journalist. I've spent many years studying in Europe, and I felt very big differences between the education delivered by universities and journalism institutions. But I think things are getting better now. People are looking for know-how and knowledge how to do it. There is cooperation. For example, at ASBU, we have a lot of common training with international organization who delivers this kind of journalism. I want to mention we have this training academy in Tunisia, in Tunis, which delivers many kind of training, including investigative journalism. I wanted just to mention I called it this outsider vision of the Arab world. I've been reading a lot about the freedom of press in the Arab world and investigative journalism of the world, investigative journalism in the Arab world. I found this international report are a lot of there is a lot of bias in this report. This is what I call outsider view. Part of this can be blamed on the Arab authorities because they are not delivering properly the information. And I think part of this problem is just this report preferring to easy job than to go deep into the facts in the Arab world. The Arab Spring was a turning point in the investigative journalism. We have, for example, I can cite the institution of Arij in Jordan. Even it was created before 2011. This very big experience. Arij deliver every year many trainings of investigative journalism. This organization is delivering also awards across the year for investigative project. This is just to give you an example of what is going on in the Arab world in terms of investigative journalism. Thank you very
Marty,
much.
thank you very much. And I want to come back to some of the points you raised. I wanted to circle back to Belen if I could. We talked very briefly at the beginning about the role of social media in the investigative work that you did. And there's so much tension, it seems to me, within the journalism world writ large right now about how to feel about social media. We all dove in. Everybody was supposed to have this account, that account. It was how we were going to reach our audience, engage with a wider audience. And then we've encountered kinds of things that have pushed back. And, on the one hand, Lardy, you talk about the Arab Spring. Many of us, perhaps as outsiders, think of that as a way in which social media was pivotal in getting information across. We all know the worst of it as well, and the disinformation, misinformation. Belen, can you talk about how you were able to access it for the use of real investigative journalism?
Well, basically what we did is we approached the information in social media just like any other source in a way. Because there is content out there. So for us, it was just about applying the same journalistic standards that you would apply to any other content or any other source. The Russian apparatus is putting out all of this content in social media. And of course, what you need to be very careful is in the verification phase. So we looked at what they were putting out there, and then we were asking ourselves, okay, where is this coming from? It's coming from this account. Is that the real account? What is it showing? They're saying that it is showing kids arriving in this location. Then you start doing things like geolocation, you start cross-checking your sources, you start really trying to get to the bottom of what they are putting out there, leaving outside the rhetoric, just really going for the facts of what they are putting out there. This is, of course, going to become a lot more difficult now with AI and with all of the fabricated content that is going to come out there. But up until this point, at least certainly in this investigation, we were able to do this just because of the sheer volume that was out there, which would allow you to do things like cross-checking the same event from many different sources. And that's where you start to say, oh, okay, so yes, so I have 50 kids here, which are also reported in this other place. So in this sense, social media, yes, you have to be very careful. You have to always put an extra filter of verification, but ultimately, I think it needs to be approached like any other source, with just the very real journalistic practice of asking the right questions, asking yourselves what's the agenda behind what is being put out there. In that sense, is not much. There's not a lot of difference of somebody whispering something in your ear, which also may come with an agenda behind. And it is a trusted source. So it really is about applying journalistic standards. And then we have a lot of technical tools that would help us. They're saying these kids arrived in April in Moscow. Okay, well, does that look, is that the Moscow station? Oh yeah, that's the sign. Let's cross it. Let's geolocate it. Let's look at the weather. Let's look. There's a lot of OSINT experts, and we have a verification unit here at the EBU, and they spent a lot of time doing this. We systematized it. We look at dozens of videos that really gave us this volume that allowed us to create the playbook and really see that this was a system.
I just wanted to dive in and ask if this isn't the sort of the luxury that comes with having a large consortium of broadcasters working together to get this kind of work done. Is it the sort of thing that really exists only in the ecosystem of broadcasters or media organizations that can pull together? And is it realistic for someone working in a small station somewhere themselves?
Well, you would be surprised. I mean, within our little group, we also call this the pajama investigation, because a lot of these video searching was done by us in the evening at home in our pajamas, looking at all of these videos. And so we weren't, I mean, with the EBU is a large organization, but the group of people looking at this, as you could see in the other slide, there weren't that many of us. So it is, again, the technical tools do give you possibilities, the fact that it is out there. And you don't need to travel so much. Of course, yes, if you have a verification unit and you have experts, indeed, you do have a luxury. But this is also where collaboration comes in. We had a verification unit, but we're not able to report on the ground. And another broadcaster was able to go and find families in Kharkiv and families in Izium who could give us those personal stories that would complement what we had been doing here with the verification unit. So again, collaboration and sharing can come to cover those resource holes that can happen sometimes.
Thank you for that. Reporters who are working right now covering the conflict between Russia and Ukraine are in sort of clear physical danger, one that's very easy to sort of get your head around. You understand what's happening there. Giselle, you talked about the number of journalists in Africa who are in danger simply by virtue of the work that they're doing. That makes me think about a question that we've received from someone asking if there are any good phone apps that you're aware of designed to help protect reporters or work with them in their safety, and in particular for women. The question, the International Women's Media Foundation created the Reporta app many years ago. Some said it had some flaws, though. Is there an app that's being used more widely today for reporters' safety in the field?
Thank you very much. Here in Africa, we still relied on primary source of information, like personalities, like the website, like social media. We try, and many journalists try to verify these information, but we are not able to verify it every time because of many reasons, like internet. The consumption in the internet in Africa is not than more 20%, 25% in the many countries in Africa. We are not have possibilities to verify every time. And this last year, I observed something here in Africa. You have some journalists to verify their information, publish false information to have a reaction of those who are for those who are implicated in this information. And when they publish this false information, you have the reaction, and you have after it the right who is coming, the right information. And it's very difficult for our credibilities like journalists, because some personalities, some political personalities, some economic personalities look journalists like somebody who every time is giving them false information, who lies, who give the false information, and it is very bad for our image in our work like journalists. But sometimes is the only possibility for them to have the right about certain information. But like every journalist in the world, we do like you. We go in social media, we go in website, we try to have documents like everybody. We give information who are like our society. Our information is like our society. Sometimes it's good, sometimes it's not good, but we try to continue to do this to be up to the task in Africa, to give information in Africa, and sometimes and this information is necessary to make our society to go up.
Nanette, I wonder if I could ask you if you're aware, getting back to the earlier question, of any particular apps that reporters can be accessing to ensure their safety. Is there, as Giselle was talking about, it isn't always a government that is pushing back against your journalism or is going to take some action against you. It can be individuals who simply don't like what you've found and reported.
Yes, thanks, Diane. And I have to say, I'm not aware specifically of an app or a tool that journalists could use. But if you allow me just to go in on that point of safety, I mean, it's obviously a huge issue for journalists, and we see this in the numbers. We mentioned them already, but I think it's good to repeat: 67 journalists killed last year, and close to 600 in detention. And so I wanted to go back to one point that Larbi also mentioned, and that's the question of safety, in particular for women journalists. And I also saw in the chat and in the question there was an app that was published by the Center for Women in Media, in particular. And I think this is we see on one hand how the safety of women journalists is a particular issue, and how women journalists are really subjected to violence and to abuse, to online abuse. But what we also see, and I think that goes back to the question of journalism and independent journalism really being important to uphold the rights of all of us, is that we still also don't see enough women journalists. There's still a big discrepancy in media organizations between the number of men and women working in journalism. I think the panel today is in a way a bit of an exception and does not reflect what we see across the world in media organization. And in order to really carry out its mandate and to reflect society and really work and strive to uphold the rights of all of society, I think it's also very important to look at these two aspects of women in media. One, the safety of women journalists, but also the representation of women journalists, which in turn begets more representation also of women in content.
Thank you for that. And I would ask if people who are listening do have some apps that they use that you've had good success with, please drop that in the Q&A. And then others can see it, or you can drop it in the chat window as well, and people can check it out. Larbi, I wanted to follow up on, you had made the point to me even beforehand in an email, your thoughts about the outsider view of journalists who cover Arab states from a distance, or they drop in, they're there to research a story, they report their story, and the disconnect that you feel they experience. What's the most profound thing that you think journalists are getting wrong?
Yes, this is the, just let me to mention that this outsider vision is not about just investigative journalism. It's about everything about the Arab world. This is what they call, the French call it un monde problématisé, a problematized world. So it's going to be affect everything, every reading you are going to do in this part or region of the world. Not having enough information is going to affect international report. And as I said, something is to blame on the Arab authorities, and also this report, they are not getting the information, so they are creating some reading instead of not telling something, or since you don't have the information, you should abstain from making analysis. Instead, international reports are engaging in analysis without having this information. The second thing is they are getting information not from the source, not from the on ground in the Arab world. They are getting this information second hand, third hand, fourth hand. Instead of going inside, it is not easy to go inside the Arab world to get this information, but at least you need to mention that my analysis is lacking the information, at least.
Thanks for that. Belen, I wanted to ask, this is one of those big picture questions that, you know, if you can answer it, good for you. I think we're all trying to do it.
Okay.
Which is, we know every day we wake up, we confront the world we left behind, but it's getting trickier. Misinformation, disinformation is present in our investigative world in a way it certainly wasn't when I started 36 years ago. And yet it's confronting us every day. The information that we're seeing that's just coming out, you know, like a running hose. And the information that's being given to us that we now have to be much more skeptical of than we did at one point. How do we make sure that what we investigate, that we stand behind, that we say is valid and true, is what's heard, that it gets heard over top of all of the noise?
Thank you for that one.
Yes, good luck.
I think what we need, I mean, there is the one thing that I think we have and that audiences still value is trust. I think you know, certain news organizations we may not be as flashy, we may have a problem. Certainly traditional legacy news organizations may have a problem reaching young audiences, and that's something that we all know we need to work on. But we do know that we are seen as trusted, and we need to cherish that, and we need to be extremely careful and just verify, make sure that what we put out there is solid, because that will be the one thing that will get us going through time and will make the difference between all this noise. Because the same way the noise is out there and it is very quick and clickbait is there, but there is also scandals every day, and we all see how some of these places are just like this week's flavor. So I think for journalism and for investigative journalists, I think the challenge is just never stop questioning, never stop verifying, and don't fall into the trap of being faster or just putting it out there for impact. Just make sure, above all, that what you're doing, you can stand, that you have a leg to stand on, because that is the one thing that I think will make us survive over all of the other noise that is out there. It is a tough battle, because there's financial implications to it. There's a lot of pressure on media, political, financial, and whatnot. But I at least personally firmly believe, and this is also, even with my own kids, what I try to tell them is always question what you're being told. And when in doubt, go to a reputable source. We need to stay as those reputable sources.
Thank you for that. And I think it's never more true than when, as a reporter, you find yourself in a conflict zone. As many reporters, including Canadian reporters, find themselves right now around Sudan. There's a question to you, Giselle. How can reporters on the ground, especially those who are coming in from elsewhere, manage the objective of trying to get the information with ensuring their safety? What would you say to them?
In Africa here, journalism, I tell you that journalism try to do their best to collect information. Sometimes it is by their contacts in the society here in Africa. You are a good journalist when you have many contacts in all of the part of the society. You have the politics, who are your friends, you have the economics, who are your friends, you have everybody in the different part of society. We try to have somebody who can give you any information when you need it urgently. But you have another journalist, I told you, who go to internet, social media, take information there and will publish it. Sometimes they verify it, sometimes they not verify it. And it is the problem with our credibility, I told you. And you have again, some journalists who take their information by connection. I think in your own world, you have the same type of journalists who have connection with many personalities, politics personalities, social personalities, religious personalities, and they are, with this connection, they can have the information in the to give their public. Women again, how these journalists do? They try with themselves. I don't know how to tell you. It's not a particularly manner to assure your own security. You try to be you just try to be careful when you are working. And women have more possibilities than the men, for the reason that you know, because men is sometimes, I can tell that men is every time, how do you call it, weak. When they are in front of the women, they give them information, because it's the women to make their work easy, to be the gentleman, for many reasons. Like this reason, every journalist tries with his own beings. Yes.
Thank you for that. Nanette, I want to ask you a question that I realize it's a tough one to get your arms around, which is that in many cases, investigative journalists give themselves that title. Pardon me, whether it's the organization they work for calls them an investigative journalist, or someone can call themselves that. But there's tension with even within the world of journalism about who is allowed to call themselves that. Not everybody agrees on the work that's done, or even the the title. From your perspective, how do you define investigative journalism?
Thanks, Diana. And as you said, I don't know that I can really answer the question, but what I would say is that in the end, the proof is in the pudding. And that is, what is the work that is being done by journalists? How thorough are they? How deep do they drill? What do they uncover? I mean, Belen walked us through her process, and our other colleagues, of course, as well, you know, and just said, in the end, what will prevail is thoroughly researched, investigative journalism. And whether you call that investigative journalism or whether you call it journalism and quality journalism, I'm not sure to what extent the label is so important, but in the end, what is important is the quality of reporting and is the critical role that independent media play in every society.
And Belen, I just wanted to run that notion by you as you talked about the group of the journalists that have worked together with you. We see it with the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists and other bodies where the old lines of competition are going down as journalistic organizations realize that they can better leverage their work, amplify it, get it to a larger audience if they can work together. In your experience, has that been more successful than working as independent groups? And what do we give up by doing it?
Well, no, absolutely. I mean, I think everybody's starting now to realize that there's always a give and take. Obviously, the exclusivity that you may have when you're going at it alone is not what you have when you share. However, the impact that your work can have when you're sharing it, or even the resources that you're able to pool when you're working together, I think far pays off this little thing that you can do in your little corner. Now, we are obviously also in a comfortable position at the EBU in the sense that, first off, we're all public service media, so that's the mandate. The mandate is public service, and that is above everything else. So that unites us in a way more than the competition. The fact also that a lot of our members have published in different languages and for very different target audiences can also help the sharing of results. The competition still sort of exists. I think by nature journalists sometimes are, but we talk things through. We talk about embargoes. We talk about publication deadlines. We talk about, there is a way to make things okay for everybody. And then especially what we talk about is we talk about credit. So whoever does also gets the credit for it. It's not about stealing other people's work. There are ways to negotiate all of those things while preserving what really matters, especially in investigative stories, which, even though they're just another type of journalism, they normally, because of the topics and because of the very definition of uncovering something that wasn't known before, have a huge impact. So I think everybody can appreciate that if your story is going to reach, 20, 80 countries rather than your own audience in your backyard, there is a value on that, and definitely a public service value that far supersedes whatever little prestige may come with it in your own little market.
We've come to the top of the hour and the end of our time, but Nanette, I wonder if I could impose on you to just sort of give a closing thought as we look at the significance of this day and the significance of the work that's being done right now. People who have joined us are working with their colleagues in their respective places, trying to get truth in front of citizens who deserve nothing less than that.
Thanks, Diana. And I think the key word that you just mentioned is truth. And I think we've heard today from Giselle, from Larbi, from Belen, how they in their own regions really pursue this, and often at great risk, they and their colleagues, and how important it is for all of us and for our societies. And I think this is what this day is there to take a moment to remember and to treasure, if you want, and appreciate, but also to see how we can all do our part and work together to make sure that press freedom and the important and precious public good that it is not being infringed and can be exercised really around the world.
Thank you. Nanette Braun from the United Nations Belen Lopez Garrido has joined us from the European Broadcasting Union. Giselle Ngamiga is the chief editor of the African Union of Broadcasting. And Larbi Magari has joined us. He is with the Arab States Broadcasting Union in Algiers. Thank you all. I know it's been a bit of an effort to try to organize people's schedules and time zones, and everybody's busy. But I can say on behalf of the organizers that we so appreciate you taking the time, and certainly those of us, or those of you who joined us in the chat as well, either to participate with questions or just to listen. We all believe in journalism. Journalism is under fire, it seems, from every possible direction at all times. So it's ever more important that those of us who believe in it so much just double down and commit to the value of it. So thank you for joining us on this day, and we wish you all safety. Goodbye, everyone.
Thank you. Goodbye.